Real quick before we get into the interview. One of the first exercises I run with executive teams is mapping their business portfolio to visualize the current work in progress and how it aligns to the overall business strategy. Now, without exception, every time I run this exercise, the gap between the current state and desired state is far wider than every executive believed, hoped, or even imagined. I've put the exact template to use, how I do this, and made it free for all of you to download by following the link in the comments. Go get your copy and let me know how it goes. Now back to the show. Welcome to the Unlearn podcast. On this show, I'm delighted to be joined by Rob Smedley, founder and CEO of the Smedley Group. Now, I had the pleasure of meeting Rob a couple of weeks ago at the Monaco Grand Prix, where his business is using F1 technology to solve complex problems fast. Rob was not necessarily the most engaged person in school, but following that, he had the opportunity to go and work in Formula One with the Jordan Racing Group. From there, he was one of an early engineers on the team, had the chance to actually go on and work at Ferrari and Williams, and then continue to work with Formula One using data technology to innovate and help those businesses grow. Today, he's working on his own new venture, a Global Karting League, where he's making it easier for more people to get involved in motorsports. But before we learn more about that, let's go back to where it all got started for him and turning points for him in his unlearning moments as he got into motorsport and more. Enjoying the podcast? Don't forget to subscribe and follow us on YouTube. This way, you won't miss any episode and it greatly supports our podcast. But one of the things that just struck me straight away was just interesting in your own story about how you even got into motor racing, right? Even the way you sort of, I suppose, grew up through the academic system was kind of fascinating to me. You know, I always love when people have these sort of like non-conventional ways about how they find to what they're doing. And, you know, you just struck me as someone who'd definitely sort of figured it out as they go along. But if you think back to maybe, you know, in your own career, if you will, was there a moment where maybe at the time it didn't mean a lot, but when you think back in sort of retrospect, you're like, no, that was a really sort of inflection point about how I thought, about how I approach things, that's had a real effect to what I'm doing today?
Yeah, I think like for me, it's always been definitely like figure it out, like commit to something, don't be scared, and figure it out as you go along. And I think there's been quite a few moments in my career, at least, where either taken a deliberate decision or something's just kind of fallen into my lap, and it's been like significantly more profound than I would have imagined. And I think that's why I am a person. I think that's taught me over the years to be kind of like wait and see how things do turn out, you know, like commit to something, do it. I'm a great believer in manifestation of beliefs, right? I think that if you are bright enough, you have, in business terms, a good enough team around you, and you are committed, and there's no magic to this, you work hard, you can manifest pretty much what you want, right? I really truly do believe that, right? It's got to be sometimes like, you know, I want to like manifest like Amazon or Apple. That might be a little bit difficult, but if you just kind of lower your sights slightly and think, yeah, this is something which is achievable in the real world. I honestly believe that you can do it. So that's why I kind of set out on this journey, and along the way, I've just, as I said, like use that word, like commit to something. Just say, do you know what? Sod it, I'm going to do it, and let's see how it turns out. And I know that we'll be able to make it work. You know how you mentioned, like, you know, my kind of meandering through academia to begin with when I was a kid. I wasn't a great student at school. I absolutely was a terrible student. I went to a comprehensive school in the northeast of England, a town called Middlesbrough, which I dearly love and have had coming up to 5 decades of pain with the football club there. But we'll brush past that. And I didn't really have a great deal of interest in school or academia at that point, and it was only that I think when I was at comprehensive school, before I went to sixth form, I found it utterly boring. It didn't engage me at all, and I think that is still this is a really broad, sweeping statement, but I think there's still millions of kids like me, like tens of millions of kids like me in the UK, who feel like that, who could actually go on to have brilliant careers if they got, if they were able to understand the opportunities that are in front of them. So there's a real, that's something that I feel passionate about. It's something that I engage with. It's something that I want to make a difference with as well, about engaging kids in education, like even in the business now. Because I think that, we have to make things exciting for young people, right? Education has to be exciting. It has to be engaging. And when I look back, when I was a kid, as I said, I just wasn't engaged in it. I found it utterly boring, a complete waste of time. I mean, part of which the technical subjects I could probably, maths and all of that type of stuff, I could do without really putting a great deal of effort in. So, that ironically engaged me even less. Then I went to sixth form and my teacher said to me, we really think you should go on to university. So I did. I did end up going on to university. But I kind of meandered through all of that. I'm not going to bore you with that whole story, but I meandered through that for quite a while, not really, knowing if, what I wanted to do, thinking I was brilliant because I could get really high scores in my exams and not put much effort in. So thinking that was made me
Yeah. You were cruising. That's it. Yeah.
I had this is a true story. Like my library card, I was so proud, because I got to the third year of my degree, probably 3/4 of. So I'm now I was almost into my fourth year, and I hadn't been in the library. I hadn't been in the university library, and I thought that was just absolutely made me one of the coolest people on the campus. It didn't. It just made me a fucking idiot who wasn't realizing the opportunity. So and then even the way kind of just dropped into to motorsport, I guess. But I think if I look back at the significant moments in my career, definitely earlier on there were ones of pain, right? Get on the pain train, as we like to say in my business now. Because I think, realizing things didn't work, realizing that you weren't quite as good as you'd expected yourself to be, and then really kind of bimbled around the lower echelons of Formula One and motorsport for a while. Probably one of the most serendipitous things that ever happened to me was actually through a press release. So I was very young. I was working for a Formula One team called Jordan Grand Prix, which in today's incarnation is the Aston Martin team, for a wild Irishman called Eddie Jordan. And I was engineering. I was far too young to do it. And the only reason that I was the lead engineer on the car was because Eddie didn't want to pay people a lot of money and I was cheap. So that's absolutely the only reason. So I was engineering a really fast Italian driver called Giancarlo Fisichella. And we actually had a couple of race wins in that Jordan, which we should never have done. And when he left, he wrote...
I remember those good old days. Yeah, Spa-Francorchamps going. Yeah, there's so many good wins there over the years. Yeah, it's well done.
There you go. So then when Fizzy left to go to the Sauber team, there was the usual press release of, I'm leaving this team, I'm going to this team, and there's lots of platitudes and nice words, all of them pretty much meaningless. But completely out of the blue, he said, but, I've had a nice time at Jordan and I would like to thank the team. I'm now moving on, But I would sincerely like to thank a young guy you've never heard of. He's called Rob Smedley, and he was my engineer, however many years. And this, he basically wrote something like, this young lad is like a rising star. I think he was probably drinking a lot of the time or something like that. But anyway, Ferrari
Oh yeah.
Ferrari picked up that press release and offered me a job. I didn't actually go there. I went there a year later. They offered me the job twice. But there was, I don't know, I'm rambling now, Barry, but there was all like these serendipitous like moments in my career that kind of turned out to feel not very seismic at the time, but then did become seismic. And I think that twinned with not really having a very fixed plan and, you know, growing a thick skin through all of the failures. Failures are really part of a career. They're such an integral part of a career. I think all of that has led me to where I am today. It was just like, you know, sod it, let's get on with it, let's try something.
Yeah, no, like it's a great mentality to have, right? Like a lot of people that we have on the show, you know, they all come from these sort of non-obvious, non-conventional spaces. And even you talking about, you know, your study, right, that you aren't necessarily the most academically applied character in the class. But yet, you know, you obviously had the smarts and you applied yourself when it mattered, and how to activate that in someone is always kind of interesting. You know, often we find sometimes it's a hard challenge. It's something that's never been done before. It puts you outside your comfort zone and you have to grow to sort of fill the gap, where maybe in something else you could coast because it just came naturally to you. Like these are all sort of really interesting growth opportunities I find when you know people do put themselves in hard situations where you're doing something that's not easy to do, that maybe has never been done before or you've never done before, and it forces you to sort of figure it out, right? And that's a great spot whether you're an entrepreneur or imagine an engineer, right? Like every year I can only imagine now, you know, I'm naive into Formula One, but I see rules come out, design constraints are set, and then really it's a race to see who can optimize within those constraints, right? The best machine, I imagine, which is a process of experimentation, of testing, you know, and then and what I really enjoy, and or certainly enjoyed about listening to folks like you talk about this, is that the score, you get pretty fast feedback. You can get feedback in a lap, you can get feedback at a race weekend, you get feedback throughout the whole season, right? It's a system where you know, the accounting is done, and the results are sort of laid there for everybody to see. So what are you going to do differently next week to improve? And that there's not many places where you get to do that, right? When you spend, you know, I've had like a lot of traders on the show. People who trade stocks love it because at the end of the day, there's a score. They're either up, they're either down, or something, you know, there's a result that they get, this feedback mechanism all the time. And Formula One struck me as there's an aspect of that to it too as well. So what were some of the things that sort of inspired you, or maybe you think a little bit that you had to unlearn as you went through these experiences of working for obviously more crazy Irish people like Eddie, through to, you know, being part of the Tifosi of Ferrari, an iconic brand and business, right through to Williams and so forth. But what were some of the things you had to unlearn about, you know, how to drive improvement, how to figure out unknowns, how to sort of work within tough constraints to optimize this sort of engineering problem that you're trying to solve, and the people side of it too, obviously, with the drivers and the teamwork that needs to happen for it to be successful?
So I think one of this is probably a more of a softer skill element here, but when you kind of you one of the things that I had to unlearn as a human being very, very fast to succeed in the world of Formula One was that, you know, you are going to be uncomfortable every single day. You are going to be uncomfortable. And if you're not uncomfortable, if there's not some level of discomfort to what you're doing, you're probably not trying hard enough. And it was something that I learned very early on. You know, if you mentioned there that, you know, businesses talk about innovating all the time, you know, and even now, like I go and help businesses with, you know, how do we build high performing teams? How do we become more innovative? All of this type of stuff. And they talk about it. And then they it's like their sustainability charter. They do it from like 3 till 5 on a Friday afternoon. If you're going to really innovate, you've got to unlearn the fact that, you're all looking at, whether it's the top line or the bottom line on your balance sheet, right? You've got to somehow unlearn that behavior, and you have to kind of do the meandering. Is it Jeff Bezos who was talking about this quite recently, who like kind of goes and just has a think about stuff?
Correct. Yeah. He was on the Lex Friedman podcast, and he's one of these people who's a big believer that you sort of have to like potter around.
Yeah.
That you actually have to make space to just like, immerse yourself in the soup for a little bit, and not everything has to be massively action oriented. But this idea that you talked about before of when you commit to something, like that's it, like you put everything behind it. But this notion of meandering, tell us a little bit about that. Like, because racing is intense, right? Like I look in the garage, like people are looking at data feeds. There's a lot of like tweaking going on. What about this? What are the other competitors doing? Like you're almost overloaded with like real time information now, and sensors in the machines, and yet like there, the human side of it, as you're sort of alluding to, like. Yeah, tell us more about that.
So I think this is when you're talking about like learning and unlearning behaviors. Like so Formula One team, you're right. If you look at what a Formula One team does on a weekend, it's like hyper regimented, right? It's kind of, we are committing to winning this race, so let's start with a plan and work backwards. And every single moment that we have is precious to us to understand the car, to move forward relatively compared to our competitors, and to try and gain an advantage to try to meet that objective of winning the race. And it's hyper process driven. Once you're inside, you kind of like think, oh, well, there must be like these, like all these superheroes inside this Formula One team. It's not, it's just nerds. It's just geeks like me, just kind of like going through this very, very process driven, like, schedule, if you like. But then if you go back to a development and an innovation, there's less innovation that goes on at the track. The innovation is in the design and the development of the car. And there you have to be allowed the freedom to effectively innovate. Because if you're not innovating, you're standing still, right? I always used to say to my teams, and I say to my teams now, if we're doing something and you know how to do it, let me just be really clear about this. That's not innovation, right? You're just repeating what somebody else has done before, right? So here's the thing, right? If you don't feel uncomfortable about it, if you don't try it and make a mistake, right, and go, I got that wrong, it shouldn't be like that. I was expecting this outcome. I got that outcome, right? That's all right. Don't worry about that, right? Nobody's going to hit you over the head for doing that. And if businesses can't create an environment where people are allowed to innovate, and innovation will mean being uncomfortable, making mistakes, wasting money, right? What the bean counters would look at as wasting money. It's not wasting money at all, right? It's a really, really strong investment of money. If you've got an R&D facility that is trying to achieve something, trying to innovate, trying to build capability beyond what your competitors can do, and in the meantime they make mistakes, that's normal, right? It's absolutely normal. So don't look upon that as, oh my god, like I've employed a bunch of half-wits who don't know how to technically innovate, right? Whatever your area will be. But also don't look upon that as wastage in your business. It's not wastage, it's just investment, right? It's like any kind of investment. It's like venture capital investment, right? You don't invest in 100 companies and then say, and all of those 100 are going to like make it. You invest in them, and there's a certain percentage of them that you know are going to go gangbusters, and that sustains your business, right? So it's like it's an investment. And I think that sometimes businesses have to unlearn that behavior of, everything has to be like hyper process driven, and one thing needs to lead to another, and it all needs to be additional to the balance sheet. It's not, it's about investment, and Formula One does that very, very well, right? It allows itself to do that very, very well. And I think
are some of the breakthroughs that you and the team found? Like, where did they come from? Like, so you're at the track, maybe you had an insight on the day, or is it the time in between races? Is it the off season? Like, how do you create the, as you say, like the sort of the chance for people to wander a little bit, rather than when I'm on the track, I've got Thursday to Sunday. There's like, 3 practice sessions. There's a qualifying. There's a race. Like, it's a schedule, as you were saying, right? It feels more like an optimization process rather than an exploratory process, right? So where do you bake in the exploration then? How do you do that as a team? Do you debrief after the races? Do you all just say, right, let's take 3 days off after this event and come back with new ideas? Like, what are some of the mechanisms you would use?
No, I do that. I see. I think that's where like, it's really interesting what you say there, Barry. Like, would you take 3 days off? No, because it's innovation. That culture of innovation is just embedded in the business of Formula One. So, of course, we talked about this process of optimization. You want to optimize your vehicle, your performance, your result during that Grand Prix weekend. But back at the factory, it's it's a much more innovative, like, embedded within the fabric process. It's the culture of the business of innovation. So you don't take time off to innovate. You're just constantly innovating, right? You've got your day job. Everybody has their day job, but I think if you can build a team that has the capacity to be able to innovate as well as deliver, right? This is the thing, because if I'm saying,
it's a fun question, yeah, right? Because we often find in startups, right, there's people who are just like awesome at executing, like just getting shit done. And then there's like, the weirdo in the corner who's sort of, their hair is all over the place, but they're secretly Einstein, like dreaming shit up, and they do nothing. And then one day they're like, bang, here's an idea. And everyone's like, wow, that's it. That's a breakthrough. So do you think of your teams like that too as well? Or is it like, do people have to develop that muscle of, right, when I'm in race mode, I'm optimizing. When I'm in factory mode, I'm experimenting. Like, what like, how do you make those changes as well? Like, do you feel like because they're different locations, like people go to a mindset when they're in race mode versus when they're in factory mode? Like, what are some of the things that you start to notice in characters, or do you have to build your engineering team around with those things in mind?
Yeah, you do, and you have to kind of understand. You're right. Like, when you talk about, like, the mad scientist type persona, right? You usually find the slightly less mad very, very quiet, get angry at like the most inane things at times, like all right, I got to upset this person, and by like walking in the room, or like by like walking, shadow in the window or something. I've had all that before. But that's all great. I think that I'm a great believer in, when I talked about being uncomfortable, right? And if you're gonna truly build something special, whatever it is, you have to be uncomfortable. And I think that's the same with the people that I've always surrounded myself with, right? I've constantly had, in my last Formula One team when I was with Williams, I constantly had like. I'd be constantly in trouble with HR, saying like, one of your like managers or senior managers or somebody who works within your area has done this, and we find this quite unacceptable, in a workplace or wherever. And like, I would be like, yeah, but the guy's a fucking genius. Like let's just like if you don't have those people like that, honestly, you're gonna go backwards. And like, I have found it my place in life as well to be protector of people like that, to surround myself with people who are like a bit off the wall, a bit like, they're very difficult to manage. They're probably, some of them are individual contributors, some of them can work in teams, but not always very well. All of them across the board, because we're talking about scientists and physicists and mathematicians and engineers, have massive egos, right? So you're trying to manage this whole like band of people, but incredibly high functioning, right? When you get them to actually output and do what they're able to do, they're prolific, right? If you get one, prolific data scientist or mathematician or physicist, right? They will output at times one thing which is worth 20 mediocre, easy to manage people. And when they're actually just doing, they're normally they will be. It's like the Paul Gascoigne thing, right? When Paul Gascoigne, the famous footballer, when he was getting shouted at by one of his managers, and he said for basically drinking alcohol, and he said, "Well, what's your problem? Because even when I'm drunk, I'm better than anyone else, right?" I want people like that. They're the people that I want, right? So even when I'm difficult to manage, even when I roll in at 11 o'clock, I'm still producing stuff that other people can't produce, right? Managing a team like that, having people in your team like that, you can't fill your team with people like that, right? Because otherwise nothing ever gets done. Operational execution just becomes like, it just doesn't happen. But you've got to have people like that. So I think, innovation comes from people, because they are the innovators, right? People like
Absolutely,
that.
Yeah. They're mavericks. They're bringing something different.
Exactly. You can't sit them down and say, can you optimize around this like really small position that we've got here? We're already at 99%. Can you get us to 99.5? They're just going to go, fuck it. That just, first of all, you wouldn't get people to do like that. They just look at you like, especially in my business now, I've got people, they just look at me like I was an idiot, that I've asked them to do something so menial and then just do what they want, right? But it's the doing what they want. As long as you can kind of guide that and get that in some kind of direction that will have a really, really positive outcome for the business, that's where innovation happens. So I think it's a team thing. I think it's a culture thing. I think it's an environment. I think it's senior leadership, from directors up to an exco, trying to unlearn behaviors that everything has to lead to something like tomorrow or the next day or by Friday, And, innovation sounds great, as does sustainability and our EDI, but we only do that from 3 till 5. So can you just do the boring 9 to 5 day job for the other 4.5 days a week? So I think I don't know, Formula One teams for me, the best Formula One teams that I've worked in have always had that spirit. I think it's across the board, but it's when the senior leadership team allows that to flourish and forces it to flourish at times. That's when you get the real magic.
Yeah, great. So you're also doing some great things yourself, even in Formula One, right? Like most people would have this preconception that, if you want to race cars, it's millionaires only. A lot of people of privilege. All the drivers often come from, very wealthy families. So it's one of these sports, though at the same time, it's growing at an exponential rate in terms of interest, adoption. It's probably never been more popular. It's probably never grown as fast. We've seen the Netflix Drive to Survive, like there's 6 or 7 series in. So this sport is exploding in terms of interest, and yet it's still for a small minority of folks that can play. But you're doing something really quite fascinating, which really struck me about even the industry trying to unlearn a little bit about how to create more opportunities for folks, to get into this sport, participate in this sport, regardless of means, background. So tell us a little bit about, what you've been working on recently, and maybe just even some of the stats about actually what a small proportion of people are actually like racing these cars.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's so true what you say about, us having to unlearn what the norm is. So like you said, Formula One, due to what Liberty Media have done. So Liberty Media are the parent company now that own Formula One, very prevalent in US sports, very prevalent in US media, obviously, and brought all of that to Formula One back in 2017. So they're doing a great job. But then you look at fortuitous, serendipitous moments like Drive to Survive that nobody knew, nobody had any idea what that would do for the sport. And the sport today has just exploded, north of 1 billion fans, every single weekend, something like 250 million fans tune in to watch Formula One in some way, shape or form, right? Incredible, unprecedented numbers. But it is still only a sport that you can view. It's a sport that you can watch on TV, right? When I was a kid and I watched football, I watched the FA Cup. I can remember the first, apart from my dad taking me to Ayresome Park, which was as miserable then as it is now. We don't go to Western Park anymore. And the lads, I know some of all the leadership team at Middlesbrough, they're going to kill me. But anyway, we'll get past that. Rescind my invites from the director's box. You're no longer welcome. Don't, please. So anyway, where was I? So I think that, when I watched football, like the FA Cup, it inspired me to go out and play football over the park, right? When you watched, I can remember like that hot summer's day, and I'm old enough to remember McEnroe beating Bjorn Borg, and it was a massive, iconic. You remember that? I don't know whether you might remember it.
Straight out on the street with your tennis racket, smashing tennis
racket, right? And then we went over the Rec in South Bank in Middlesbrough, and we played there for 2 weeks, and we're all going to be tennis stars, that type of stuff, right? But how do you do that in motorsport, right? You can't, and the reason why you can't is because it is just because of the costs. It's out of reach for all but the high net worth families, right? So you can go and do leisure karting, like at your local bus garage, where you go and play on the leisure karts, the rental carts or whatever, and that's 25 quid. It's still 25 quid, but you can't actually get involved at a serious level with the outdoor stuff, because to dip your toe in the water, it's 25k. You've got to buy all the equipment. It's super complicated. Then if you want to do it at a national level, you're probably involved with a team. It's 100k. And this is the same whether it's in the UK, it's in Europe, it's in America, it's in South America, which is where karting predominantly goes on. And if you want to do it at international level, where the Formula One teams go fishing, it costs you like 250k. Now, here's the irony, right? That the Formula One teams do go fishing in this pond of international karting. But in order to have got yourself into that pond, your family's probably spent something like £1 million as a minimum, right? Over your career.
Just table stakes, just to get a shot, huh?
Just to get a shot. So what does that mean? It means we are fishing as Formula One teams, we're fishing in a very, very small pool, which is very, very single demographic, right? Now, there's what I love to say here. There's Occam's razor, that either as a sport, right, we're so lucky that all of our world talent comes from this single tiny demographic, or there's Occam's razor. Let's just be sensible for a while without being pointy and say probably there's Occam's razor, right? So I kind of looked at this like 3-4 years ago. I had time on my hands. I was on a sabbatical, and I thought, right, when you talk to people about it, everybody says, "Oh, it's ridiculous. It's so expensive." Senior people in the sport, they're very, very vocal about it. They've got no problem of talking about it. But then everybody's kind of complicit with the fact that, yeah, but this is just the way it is, right? Yeah,
right. Yeah,
it is like that. And I was like,
it's just a sustainability project at 3 to 5 on Friday afternoon,
exactly that,
right?
Exactly that. Let's talk about it. Let's think about what we can do. Let's do a little bit of, let's get some underprivileged kids in go-karts in a bus garage in Deptford in East London for half an hour, and we'll take some pictures, and we're doing our bit to find new talent and to increase diversity, right? I got about 4 years ago, and I was sat here and had, basically said to myself, fuck it, I'm going to do something about it, right? I am not prepared to sit here and to watch this go on and this not be something that many more kids can't get involved in. So I started to have a look at where the problems are, started to have a look at how you take the cost out of it, and then started to thought, right, great, set up a little team, give him some money, and said, here's what I think it should look like, let's get on with it. And we built what is now known, we launched it last year, called Global Karting League. We built some, we're already on the third generation of karts. They're electric karts. It's a fixed price. It's arrive and drive. We took all the complexity out of it. We've taken about 95+% of the costs out of it. It's still an expense to do it, right? You can't democratize it as much as, what we were talking about before, football or
picking up a tennis racket and running out the door, right? But yeah,
I don't know that, but you can but you can democratize it a lot more than what's being done now. So it's great. I mean, I'm really enjoying the journey of the three business areas, within my business. It's the one that I definitely spend the most time and put the most effort into, because it is innovation, right? And it's hard and it's uncomfortable. And you've got to unlearn all of this. There's all these like 50, 60, 70, 80 years of experience of like, well, this is the way we've always done grassroots motorsport. And I'm like looking at it going, well, fuck you. This is the way we're now going to do it in the future, right? And we're going to change the industry. So, I think that, we want to roll it out so we are rolling it out. We're already prevalent in the UK. It's growing, it's getting better, it's established. But then I want to get it out into America as well. So we're rolling it out into the States. We have plans to put 3 of these hubs in the States. And then we've got a global league, right? By the end of next year, we've got a global league where the best kids in the UK can race the best kids in America. And then guess what? We'll expand into different territories. So the best kids from all over the world will be racing each other. And eventually you're going to go fishing in not a pool of 250, 2,000 kids, whatever the pool is today of the top kids that have the wherewithal and the means and the funds to be able to race. But we're going to be able to have literally hundreds of thousands of kids doing this all around the world, and some of it will do it for fun, and some of it will do it because they want to have a professional career out of it. So it's super exciting. Global Karting League.
Yeah, and absolutely inspiring vision, like as you say, for people who are spending $100,000 a week and then suddenly they're a year down to $5,000, like that's a game changer and taking like orders of magnitude out of this sort of thing. And one thing that really struck me as well, when we first met, I think you said you believe we still haven't seen the best driver yet on the planet. As you say, you would call it Occam's razor, but this notion that, and one story that really stuck with me is you were saying that there's some of the kids that you're coming across, right, where their parents are just, very working class folks. They drive buses, they drive vans, and yet they're these amazing kids with amazing talent who are just like, whipping everybody else all over the track, which I love this idea of like bringing up a new breed of opportunity, that you're putting yourself out there. And it's a fascinating business that you're building at the moment. And, I always think folks are trying to look for interesting innovations in different spaces, and you're doing it. It's an electric car. The price point goes down. The audience and addressable market goes wider, and it's starting to happen. So yeah, kudos to you. And I always like to say, because it's tough when you're an entrepreneur, like there's a chance folks out there to get involved in Rob's business too as well. They're raising at the moment. So if you're looking to make a bold investment on the future of Formula One, you should definitely look up the Global Karting League and get involved with them. So tell me this, as you shifted from, high performance engineer in the pit to early stage entrepreneur, banging your head against the wall for 28 hours a day, because it feels like that. What has been the thing that surprised you most as you went into much more of this entrepreneurial mode than when you were in the engineering mode? What have you learned about yourself through this whole process?
I think what I've definitely one of the things the Formula One world as a technician, as an engineer or a scientist, you're very spoiled, because the whole reason for being, the whole team, the business revolves around you. It was that whole innovation piece that we were talking about before. And so, the technology team absolutely leads the business. It's absolutely at the forefront of the business, and everything else in a Formula One team is window dressing, right? It's all there to support these, 400, 500, 600 lunatics who just leave a trail of destruction in business terms, right? And everybody else is like kind of picking up the pieces. And I didn't actually know that was I didn't know the real world, the outside world, was different. When I started my business, I was like, and I put a really like strong senior team around me. Some of the, most of the technical guys, technical director I took from Formula One, other guys we've taken from Formula One, who've all been with me for a long time, and just started running the business like that. And I think that like it was slightly like shocking for either people who were joining us for the first time or for external observers or partners or whatever, they were like, "Oh my God, how is this guy running his business?" Yeah, follow me, right? We're going to do something really cool. So I suppose what I've had to do as we've grown up as a business is slightly unlearn that and put a bit more structure around what we're doing, especially now we're starting to spend other people's money. I mean, it was for the first few years, it was ostensibly my money, so I could do what I want. And then I was like, kind of going, okay, yeah, if we're going to take other people's money, they probably want to see a slight, a little bit more maturity in terms of like approach to doing things. Yeah, I have had to, kind of unlearn and temper somewhat. I'm still like unbelievably impatient, especially when it comes to like finding technical solutions and just doing stuff. But we have had to kind of put like this, a more stable and more traditional, slightly structure around the technical team. But it still is a very, very engineering led business. I think that, for me personally, it's been like a journey. I've been an engineer or a manager, but spending somebody else's money for all of my life up until like 5 years ago. And so having to learn all the stuff, there's a lot of stuff that you kind of look at. And I've spoken to other like founders and who'd like had a long career before they become a founder and entrepreneurs. Like there's a lot of stuff what I looked at where I just thought, like stuff like sales and marketing and all of that type of stuff. It's just a black box, and like it seems really, really complex. And then actually you're at times forced to get into areas because if you are the chief executive, you've got to get into it, right? If stuff isn't working, and whether it's sales and marketing or whether or not it's finance or whatever it is, areas that I would never touch before. I was just kind of sat on the periphery and had a really light touch point with these business areas. When they don't work in your own business, you've got to get in and roll your sleeves up and understand what it is and help people to sort it out. And one of the things that I've learned is that everything, I honestly think that everything can be defined by process. Everything can be defined by you need the big ideas, you need the vision, you need to be able to kind of coalesce that into a strategy. But then it's just doing a lot of things, right? It's just doing a lot of sequential things to be able to operationally deliver. So I have surprised myself like that. Actually, now I can sit in sales and marketing meeting. I avoid them like the plague, but I can sit in sales and marketing meeting and like have a conversation with people and then pick them up and go, well, why are you doing it like that? Like, why don't we do it like this? And then they look at me, I'm sure like, well, like the director's in that area of business. Oh, fucking hell, why did he? Like, he's, I just wish he just like, how has he learned this stuff? He's learned, like, he's at the superficial level, and now he can have a conversation with him. It was much better before when he didn't know anything. So I have surprised myself with picking up this stuff and actually quite enjoying it as well. Enjoying having much bigger breadth. I didn't think that I would enjoy having the breadth that I've got now. I've always liked managing people. I've always liked building teams, just getting stuff done, turning a very, very difficult or abstract idea into something which is, operational and real. I've always enjoyed that, but it's all the other stuff around it that I didn't think I'd enjoy, but I do.
It's one of the best things about building something from nothing, I think until you go down the entrepreneurial route where you're literally, in the garage with two sticks, rubbing them together, trying to make some magic happen, and then all the growth opportunities that go along the way. I think there's no other job like it in the world than building something like that. So yeah, love hearing stories of it. So looking forward for you then, I'd love to know what you're most excited about. It feels like racing, it's never been more popular. There's more people coming to it. You've got this great, interesting business that you're building to give more people access to it at a price point that is orders of magnitude different. You're putting yourself out there in these uncomfortable sort of situations to try and build this thing. Like we've talked about like building startups and funding startups and all these things that you got to learn along the way. You can only learn this stuff by doing it. What are you most excited about as you look ahead now to building out this karting league and what's ahead of you?
Do you know what I'm most excited about? You know, people ask me all the time, what's the best thing about working in Formula One? Like, what did you individually achieve and all the rest of it? I say the most exciting thing, you've got it wrong. The most exciting thing for me is teamwork, right? I love playing my little part, right, in a really strong, high performing team. And I think that somebody said to me quite recently, actually, when I was having this exact conversation with them, they said that is probably why you've had success, you know, in inverted commas, because you do love that, right? It's not about like, oh, here I am. It's, you know, the big I am. It's kind of like I can play a small part. I can do some stuff, but I can't do everything. But I love being surrounded by these really high functioning individuals and then coalescing that into a team, and then me do my little bit as well. And that, I think, overall, apart from anything else, apart from everything we'll do with the Global Karting League and we'll do with the data analytics business, you know, and finding, you know, in some way, either through sport or formally educating, you know, hopefully millions of kids, finding the next Formula One world champions, finding the next world rally car world champions, the next IndyCar fight, all of that stuff, all of that's great. But what I'm really looking forward to is just building the business, continuing to build the business and work in a really like high functioning team and being part of that high functioning team, right? That I love that, right? Even, you know, on days when you achieve very little, if you know you're in this team of really strong individual players, but who can make up a really, you know, they've got a synergetic effect to make up an even stronger team. That for me is what gets me out of bed in the morning. I love it.
Right on, Rob. Well, that's the kind of stuff and places that people dream of being in those teams. So thanks for sharing with us, you know, your experience building them, being part of them, your aspiration to keep doing it and doing more. You know, it's fascinating what you're doing. I'd really recommend everybody go check out what he's doing with the karting business. I'll put all that on the show notes. You can check it out. And again, this is your chance to get involved. You could even be an investor in this if you get your act together and send Rob an email. I'm sure, you know, he'll be happy to say hello and tell you more about the business. Rob, listen, thanks so much for being on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Barry. Until the next time we are on a 30-meter yacht together or whatever it was.
We'll see. I remember it being 50, but, you know, you're probably on bigger yachts all the time.
100-meter is usually more my stuff.
That's funny, man. Well done. All right, cool. Listen, thank you very much. It looks like, it seems like you had fun. When people are smiling at the end, I always feel like they've, you know, got the good stuff off their chest. So,
yeah.
Thank you very much.
It was good. It was good. I enjoyed it. No, it was good. It was very good. Well done.
Thanks so much for listening. If you found this episode useful, make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Please consider leaving a rating or a review, as it helps others find our podcast. For more episode and details about the show, visit barryoreilly.com, and we'll see you on the next episode.